Welcome to the Campaign Trend Podcast, where you're joining in on a conversation with the entrepreneurs, operatives, and reporters who make professional politics happen. I'm your host, Eric Wilson. Our guest today is Makena Kelly, a senior writer at Wired, focused on the intersection of politics, power, and technology. In this episode, we dive into her recent story about the Zohran Mamdani campaign's fandom culture and how it benefited from that trend. You'll learn what online fandom looks like and what this means for campaigns as we head into 2026 next year. All right, Makena, before we get into the politics, we should ground listeners in what this fan culture actually looks like. So when we talk about fan cams, edits, and remix videos, what are these formats and how are people normally seeing them in the context of pop culture?
Yeah, fandom is everywhere. It is in sports, it's in TV, books, everywhere. I grew up, of course, experiencing fandom firsthand in the Tumblr minds. But it focuses. It's a community of people focused on what academics like to call a fan object. The fan object tends to be a person or a book, like I said. And so we can see this. I'm sure we've all kind of experienced this in moments with Taylor Swift, for example, and her community of the Swifties. Taylor is a massive cultural figure. She puts out a ton of music. She does concerts. She does so much stuff. And the fandom that we experience around her online are communities of people who are obsessed with what it is that she does. And so the way that they engage, right, in this fandom is by creating content, boosting content that she posts. Of course, you always have people, there's like people when she drops a record who are like live streaming at midnight, with like communities of people ready to, listen to that and like live listen to it. And, we see fan cams, which is oftentimes just taking clips of where this celebrity, where this fan object is and putting them into really, quick edited clips of them set to, music, whether they created the music or it's, music that they find fits into the values and themes of this person. And so fandom's huge. There's tons of huge fan communities. There's the Swifties, of course. K-pop fandom is huge. But then, there's also smaller fandoms for a variety of things. Like, what was it? I recently, because of the new Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein, I myself am a huge fan of Frankenstein. And I was like, I'm curious how Tumblr is like, reacting to this now. And I go on Tumblr, there's all this fan art about the new Frankenstein, people engaging with it. And so it's not just like a community of people, but also fandom is, a category of behaviors that people express online.
Yeah, and I think probably for our listeners, like the best way I would understand this is if you map how the sort of I don't know, like the read, write, own sort of evolution of the internet or Web 3.0 or however you want to call it, mapping it onto fandom, where let's say last century you would you liked a movie star, or you liked a band, you would buy their stuff, you would just sort of consume more of their things, and then as it progressed, we started to be able to find other people, whether that's through Comic-Cons or theme parks or things like that. And now fandom has progressed to where you are remixing that culture to sort of show that you're part of this in-group and you're able to find other people.
Yeah, I think the difference, in online fandom is how participatory it is. Right.
Exactly.
That's really like the key part of all of this, is that you as a fan feel involved, not just, kind of a parasocial relationship with the fan object. And then you find a group of people who also have similar interests, and you engage with that the way that you would engage with a lot of stuff online. And it's really, I think it's really important to note that so many people, especially younger people who are just now, right, entering politics, who are just now, becoming 18, awakening to politics, being able to vote. This is how they engage with stuff online, right? Yeah. And of course, this is what they're going to bring to politics.
And I think probably, again, if I could just distill it to one single example for folks, think about every time a hit song comes out, or maybe there's, there's a dance that comes with it. So people can then record themselves doing the dance and put that online. And that is, I guess, at the essence of participatory fan culture.
Yeah, that and then making videos and all other things
Yeah.
that talented people online tend to do.
And then, okay, so you draw this distinction between fandom and sort of ordinary supporter enthusiasm, right? Anyone who's ever been to a political convention knows that people really love their politicians. They buy all of the buttons, all of that kind of stuff. So what is separating a campaign with those strong supporters from a campaign with true fans, as we understand them in this new culture? Or is that just simply what political support looks like for young voters now?
Yeah, I don't really think it's a binary as much as it
Mm.
is a group of skills that certain people in like younger people bring to politics, and these skills are aging into politics now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the older people who are excited to go to rallies and maybe take a picture with a politician and then post that on Facebook. This is another level that comes with it now, which is I go to the rally or I just watch the rally online and I take clips of this politician saying something that really hits and turning that into a video. Or in some cases, what we saw with Mamdani a lot this year was people taking clips of him at rallies and remixing those into songs, which would then be, then people take that song and they want to do a dance to it. They want to, do something else with it. And so, yeah, I don't think I think it's just the next evolution of this, right? When you have people who grew up online engaging with the stuff that they love every day, of course, this is what they're going to bring to the politicians that they love.
Right.
It's just like a natural progression.
Yeah. And I think you underline there for us this sort of snowball effect. There's kind of a virtuous cycle of people create things, more people create on top of that, and then more people want to get involved, and it snowballs into participation. And critically, it is bottom up. So this is the question that, when I'm talking to political operatives, that they want to know, how do you harness this? How do you control this? Which we know that you really can't. But how did Mamdani's campaign keep some influence over the narrative without getting in the way of all of that organic energy from his fans?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really reductive, and a lot of the conversations I'm hearing about the Mamdani campaign now is all the takes are he's really good at social media. He's a young guy really good at social media, and that's kind of why I wanted to do this fandom piece, because if you look at what Mamdani's team did, they didn't do kind of the kitschy novelty. They didn't approach social media like, you hear so many politicians now wanting to roll up their sleeves, right? Or dress a bit more casually, say more curse words, like stuff like that, right? They didn't
Grilling, that always seems to be the point.
Exactly. And so this is not how they approached it at all. If you look at all of the videos Ron Mamdani created and his team created, he's wearing a suit. He is he's putting on, maybe I wouldn't say he's putting on, right, but he is playing the role of mayor in this content, and he is hammering all of the policy issues that hit so hard for everyone, and so for everyone who voted in New York.
Right.
So many people. I don't want to right. But but what they did is they put him in front of so many creators. And so he would dip into live streams, or he would do one-off interviews, or they even did the press conference. He wasn't there trying to do it. The campaign wasn't chasing these viral TikTok trends. It wasn't as if they were going on there and trying to do a dance or making their own fan cams. Like we see folks at the DNC are making fan cams for their own politicians. We're not seeing that, right? Instead, they stuck to the stuff that the fans were not just fans of Mamdani, but they were fans of the policies and the stuff that he was wanting to do in New York. And so they just hit that. And, I think Mamdani had when it comes to cultivating these creators and these fans, he had a lot easier than I think a lot of politicians do, which is partially, I think, because so many of the creators that he worked with, some of the big names, right, they were already on his side politically. So many of the big, leftist kind of Democrat-centered creators are really, really passionate about the Israel-Gaza conflict. That's something that he already aligned with on them. And so they were able to kind of skip that policy hump there, and just go straight for creating content, whereas I think you would look at someone like a Gavin Newsom or a Pete Buttigieg, where there's a little bit more friction there, right, on the issues, and they have to earn that trust a little bit more. But they were just able to run with it. And it was more so that Mamdani was showing up these places. He's younger. He listens to these podcasts. I was talking to some folks on the campaign, like a lot of the podcasts and like people that he worked with, he's like familiar with them, right?
Right. Yeah. He's in.
He's in there. He knows these people. And so it was a lot easier for him to show up. But instead of like, trying to pretend like he belongs there, right? Or trying to win these people over, he was allowed to just kind of show up authentically. And yeah, I think that's a main thing that happened. It really was that he just had, and I think like the one thing that I didn't really touch in the piece that I wanted to is that there's kind of that Bernie fandom that's been around since 2016.
Mm-hmm.
That Bernie fandom kind of went over to AOC a bit in 2018. She kind of has that same kind of circle of fans. And Zohran, he had been opening at rallies and stuff for AOC and Bernie long before he was running for mayor, right? And so he was already kind of involved in this community of people. He was a familiar name. So it wasn't like he came out of nowhere, right?
He was an opening act, right? Yeah. Like a band or yeah.
So he would like, I remember I was like, when I lived in New York, I was hearing about people going to whatever AOC rally or whatever. And they'd be like, and then there's Zohran Mamdani. And so he's been in these circles for a while. So he's been able to cultivate trust with these people for a long time without ever, so much of like influencer interactions with politicians is transactional. Right. And for so many years, he wasn't asking them for anything. He was just showing up in these spaces, right? And giving and doing speeches and things like that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And to your point, like whenever your electorate is New York City, you can really play up the Lower East Side sensibilities. Yep. And you've got world-class talent there, really concentrated. There was one thing that you mentioned there, which I think is another hook into how we understand fandoms in politics, which is that parasocial relationship, right? Where there was a chance that, if you created something, Mamdani might dip into your live stream or, reply to your posts on Blue Sky or whatever the case may be. And we see that a lot with Trump, right? Where, he'll just go and repost your meme if he thinks it's funny enough. And I think, one of the things that the takeaways from your reporting for me was that Mamdani's content worked because it was so accessible with clear moments that were easy for people to clip and repurpose. And I'm thinking back towards, okay, well, FDR was really good at the fireside chat on radio, but that went away the moment, TV came online and we saw JFK understood that. And then you got cable news clips and speaking in sound bites. And so I'm guessing, what are the specific habits or behaviors that make content like Mamdani's so usable for creators?
Yeah, I think one thing that hasn't been discussed enough about the whole Mamdani phenomenon is how seriously his campaign took social media. They did not see it as like a secondary thing that you do, you do an interview with the New York Times, right? And you do like all this kind of stuff, but they saw it as the primary way that the people that they needed to get out to vote were going to consume the content that they put out, right? And they took it very, very seriously, which is why you see him in a suit, which is why, you see him talking about, the campaign issues. And so I think they treated it with the same seriousness that people who are younger, right? They don't just go on social media. I think we kind of lose this in the conversation so often about like young people and the internet, right? Where they just go on there and they're like retweeting memes and sharing memes and it's all very silly, unserious stuff. But this is where they conduct their lives. Their lives are very serious business. They still are, they want to own houses. They want to get married. They want to have kids. They have all of these things. And when you see someone like that who shows up where your attention already is, taking the issues, that they, are very serious to them and taking them seriously, I think that's a lot of what happened here, right? It wasn't just treating it like the campaign wasn't the one making the memes, and with that, you can get kind of it feels very goofy and like they're not,
it's the hello fellow kids meme.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. When what these people really want you to do is actually show up in these spaces and talk about the issues, because they're smart. These people aren't dumb. Young people aren't dumb. And I think that's a lot of what they saw with Mamdani. And so repeating this, I think it's, if you talk to, if other politicians want to repeat this, I think it's, kind of taking a lesson, right? That young people are not, unserious people. A lot of these people, if they're 18 or older, they have a lot of the same dreams everyone else did, but they are just consuming their media different. It doesn't mean that media needs to be dumbed down, a lot,
Right.
or like be taken as, just a silly thing that you add on to the campaign.
Right. That's exactly right. It's not an add-on. It's part of the core strategy. And people can tell when it's a gimmick versus genuine. You're listening to the Campaign Trend Podcast. I'm speaking with Makena Kelly about the rise of fan culture in politics, specifically through the lens of her recent article in Wired about Zohran Mamdani's New York City mayoral campaign. We alluded to this earlier, McKenna, that campaigns often treat creators in this transactional way, and that ends up feeling kind of inauthentic. I think Kamala Harris's campaign was probably like a really good example of where it's just like, okay, you're an influencer. I'm coming to do, like doing the tour. So what do campaigns need to change if they want this genuine collaboration rather than kind of the, hey, I'm going to pay you to post, or I'm going to schedule 15 minutes to do your podcast?
Yeah, I think something interesting, talking to some of the folks on the campaign and creators in that space who worked with the campaign, was that there's a story and a purpose to every hit that they did, right? There are people who, for example, like the big comedian right now, Stavros Halkias. He did like a photo with Zohran and talked about him all the time. But it wasn't just that he's a huge creator, right? A huge podcaster. Stavros has a story that he tells in these moments about, like, the podcast scene that he grew up in Brooklyn. He says it would be completely impossible in today's New York for me to kind of grow up and afford and live the life that I had to, even though, you have to struggle, right? But to even be able to survive and create this kind of career for yourself. And so with that moment, it was not just, hey, let's like hang out with Zohran, but it was like, this is an issue that I, as the creator, really care about. Let's talk about it. And I think if you look at, I think if you look at a majority of all of the collaborations that the Mamdani campaign did, there was that piece. There is the story there about how that creator's story or the content that they create funnels into one of those big, 5 messaging points of the campaign. I think it was incredibly strategic. They just weren't doing scattershot collaborations like we've seen with a lot of politicians, kind of like the Kamala Harris campaign last year as well.
Yeah. And I think that the key there is you can get kind of meta with a creator. So I think one of the things that I struggle with whenever I'm advising campaigns about, well, here's how you engage with influencers. It's, sometimes it's tough to figure out how do you, you've got a really popular influencer in a region. How do you go in on that? I mean, and to your point, let's just example of like a cooking influencer, right? Well, you could go on and cook stuff, but really it's talking about creator economy and how to, modernize the way we treat new professions, things like that. And so I think that is
affordability.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
like
figuring out how to go meta with these creators is one of those strategies.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the direction where we're going to see stuff moving forward. It is, the novelty of like the 2024 election creator explosion is wearing off, right? And so people are going to have to get a lot more strategic, not just because of that novelty wearing off, right? But at this point, creators working with politicians, it's kind of a lot to ask. Kind of that novelty of like, oh, I have Trump on, or oh, I have so and so on, is also wearing off. And that tends to be, when you talk to creators, some of the content that it like least performs on their platforms, right? And so you really got to offer that creator something good, right? And something that is attached to their platform, because otherwise they're really going out on a limb in many cases just to have a politician on in the first place.
Right. One of the core arguments in your piece is that young voters are bringing fandom habits to politics. And so how should campaigns be thinking about outreach, especially to these younger demographics, now that this is the default mode. So I'm thinking about, we just had elections recently in Virginia and New Jersey and New York City, obviously. And so much of the investment is spent on things like TV, direct mail, door knocking. Do we need to be adding in like fan cam sessions or something? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, that's wild. I'm forgetting what it was, but I think there was like some film or TV studio, or maybe it was Netflix or something. There was reporting recently that they were hiring fan cam makers to make that stuff for their shows.
Yeah, mini dramas, I think, is what they're starting to,
Yeah, and so those people are getting hired in many ways. I also think it's like primarily when you look at the campaigns that are doing this well, they have young people in positions of power in the campaigns who see this stuff and can act on it and are emboldened, right, to make those decisions. And so I think, it's not just like trying to find someone. It's not just like finding people online as a campaign.
Right. Don't get your TV ad maker to create a fan cam.
Yeah, technically, but also like empowering young people who are, who right now are incredibly politically active, but also really good at doing this stuff and identifying and going. So I think that's one thing for sure. But also, this is really different. And New York is such a specific test case because of how dense the
probably
media
the most
ecosystem.
Talented city in the country.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's very, very hard to do that. I know. But, there's like, I was talking to somebody last week they were talking about like launching or creating a restaurant in Dallas, and they're going to do an ad read on a podcast. I was like, what Dallas podcast are you talking about? Well, they're like, oh, there's, all these like Texas teams, and so Texas like sports teams, and maybe like go and like focus in that direction. And so it might just be a little bit more difficult to find, right, these folks in like smaller local elections or smaller elections, but there are folks there who are creating content to work with. But as a politician, if you want to like recreate the Mamdani thing, I don't think it's very hard for me to imagine somebody going into this and be like, I'm going to start a fandom. That's not what you do, right? What you do is you would create or like run on issues or, talk about issues at least that resonate with the type of people who would, engage in these behaviors for you. Mm-hmm. And then also cultivate them. And if you see someone in this space, right, who is like interacting with your stuff, actually trying to make a real relationship with them, reaching out to them, it's unfortunately not something, I don't think it's something you can just like dump a ton of money into and like recreate. It's really intentional. And I think, that's a lot of what we saw with the Mamdani team was one of the crazy things I noticed, the week of the election was how little they spent on digital ads. Right. I remember going to like the Facebook ads database and like seeing if there was anything there.
Cuomo just spent a ton.
Yeah, but there was like nothing from them. And it was because they had been working this small group, not small group of people, but this like group of people online and these kinds of communities that they just did it for free. Mm-hmm. They did all of that marketing for free.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the big lessons from Trump, right? Is he didn't have to spend in the primary in general in 2016, he didn't have to spend a lot of money on TV advertising because everyone was talking about him. And so, you can kind of hack the attention of folks and it's sort of you're just shifting the investment. Mm-hmm. It takes more time to cultivate these relationships. I think one of the biggest things that I've just seen, doing very early versions of this in sort of the, 2016 era is being willing to give up control or at least recognize that you are no longer in control, because we would, on the Rubio campaign, we would, promote memes or retweet other creators and someone say, oh, well, this person said this thing over here a long time ago. And, and it was just, there was a communications effort internally to say, oh, well, we need to promote these people. And now it just sort of seems to be, that's standard operating procedure. But it's a mind shift for campaigns for sure.
Yeah, I think for Democrats, kind of especially recently, I feel like there's been so much of the conversation around like 2024 was how unwilling they were to take risks in this space. And but the problem is you should be taking risks in so many different risks with so many different people, right? And if it's a calculated risk, then I think for the most part it'll pay off. There may be a couple of bad bad choices. But that's kind of just the name of the game right now, taking, especially like now going into the midterms, right? This is when we would expect people to be taking the most risk and kind of rebuilding that strategy, that playbook before we get into 28.
So how should we respond to the criticism or the concern that fandom trivializes politics, where this is serious stuff, and putting together a supercut fan edit against some silly song um, leads to some sort of serious, more deep engagement. I've seen this in a few campaigns internationally where they invest a lot more in TikTok than we do, where this idea of brain rot has been pretty controversial, where it's like, no, this is how we have to create things. And they say, oh, well, it's a serious issue, but you're making it funny or trying to make it funny. Where does that come out in the wash?
Yeah, so when that story went up, I did get comments that were like, this is very, this is like trivializing all of these issues, or at least trivializing the real like support that Mamdani had. When really,
people actually went out and voted for him. It's not just online.
Exactly. But I think it's more reductive to just talk about social. I Fandom is like so much more than just like the fan cams, right? There's another level to this where people are interacting with one another because of it. There are communities of people online who then, what you can see with the because the campaign Mamdani used like some chatbots to get more people out and like volunteering.
Chat, yeah.
These people are making real communities in the real world too, and doing real politics, right? They're canvassing, they're volunteering. If you have somebody who's like making a fan cam of you and they are in that locality and can vote and can volunteer, they're probably going to be more willing to do that too. They're already taking this actual time out of their day to do something. So it's capturing that energy. And so it's a part of what they do, but it's not the entire thing. And it also gets people together in space, right? Where they're able to reinforce a lot of the behaviors. Like you have people who maybe make a fan cam and they're like, hey, nice fan cam, come canvas with me and my friends. And then they go to a bar afterwards, right? And they're hanging out. And that's not just, these are relationships that are building around politics. That's like an army of people, right? An army of friends who are going to be at maybe not your beck and call, right? But these are people who will show up again for you because they have these communities. And so I think fandom is one of the best ways to look at it, because it's not just creating content. I think that's where we lose so much of the conversation, is like, we just need to create content and put it online and all this stuff. It's all about content creation, when really the content is just, the mode, the means of like creating that bigger community, right? Which is the real bread and butter, that's what you want at the end of the day. And the content and your fans creating content and interacting online and retweeting is just part of the picture.
Well, my thanks to Makena for a great conversation. Make sure that you check out the story linked to Wired in our show notes. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, maybe you learned about what a fan cam is for the first time, all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. You look smart in the process. More people learn about the show, so it's a win-win all around. Remember to visit campaigntrend.com to subscribe to our newsletters and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get episodes. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. All right. That was